Can you imagine that Ferrari's boldest technological bet in decades ends up being its biggest mistake in years? Why has a simple engineering decision set off alarms, divided the team, and put the entire future of the SF26 project in doubt? Subscribe to continue uploading more of this type of content now, if we continue. While the engineers responsible for the engine design defended with data and simulations the use of steel as the great thermal and structural advantage, other departments within the team, especially the reliability area, and those responsible for integration with the chassis, began to show increasing resistance. For many within Ferrari, the idea of abandoning aluminum, a proven, lightweight, and perfectly understood material, was an unnecessary step into the unknown. The doubt was not only technical, but philosophical. Why risk everything in an area where stability has historically been more important than disruptive innovation? The conflict grew to such a point that two completely different engines were developed in parallel, a traditional one with aluminum cylinder heads and another radical one with steel. This duplication of efforts drained resources and created an atmosphere of division among work teams. Engineers who had collaborated side by side for years began slipping sarcastic comments into meetings. Decisions took longer than usual, and each step forward with the steel engine was followed by a counter-argument from conservative side of the shop. The pressure escalated even more when the first bench tests showed worrying signs, higher than expected temperatures, signs of thermal fatigue in critical areas, and performance that still did not clearly surpass the conventional engine. It was then that Ferrari urgently turned to AVL experts in Austria. This outside intervention was seen by some within the team as an implicit admission of failure, which further inflamed tempers. For others, it was the lifeline that would make Gualtieri's original vision a reality. But the damage had already been done. Ferrari was not a united bloc in the face of a technical challenge. It was a tense structure where each technical advance implied a new, internal political battle. And this is not just a story about an engine. It is a story about how a historic team, loaded with media pressure and championship expectations, faces the dilemma of radical innovation. Can you win in Formula One by betting on what has never been done? Or is it precisely that leap into the unknown that tends to bury dreams of glory before even seeing the light of the traffic light in the first race? In Maranello, many still do not have the answer. But what they are clear about is that the SF26 has already exacted its first price: Ferrari's internal tranquility, which today seems more fragile than ever. To talk about the SF26 is to talk about an unprecedented technical promise in Ferrari's modern history. Not because of what the car has yet done on the track, because it has not even debuted, but because of what it promises on paper from the numbers that circulate in the internal technical reports and that have begun to leak at an alarming rate. Ferrari's 2026 power unit isn't just looking to compete. It seeks to redefine what is possible in the hybrid era. The logic behind the use of steel cylinder heads is not capricious. It is the result of a cold and strategic reading of the 2026 technical regulations. When the FIA raised the minimum power unit weight to 150 kilograms, many doors were closed for light engineering. But at the same time, others opened. Suddenly, this additional weight margin allowed us to think about denser and more resistant materials, such as steel, which until now were unthinkable due to their mass disadvantage. Ferrari soon understood that this new limit gave them a unique opportunity to sacrifice grams in exchange for thermal stability, extreme pressure, and radical efficiency. And this is where the SF26 project becomes as fascinating as it is dangerous. According to internal simulations and technical reports, operating at higher temperatures and pressures thanks to steel would allow more energy to be extracted from each combustion event. We are not talking about a minor improvement. The first calculations point to a gain of 13 horsepower, which may seem modest on paper, but in Formula One they represent vital tenths. And those tenths, multiplied by laps, races, and championships, can be the secret weapon to dethrone Red Bull and McLaren. This thermal efficiency doesn't just impact power. By reducing the need for cooling, Ferrari can design a more compact car with smaller radiators and a narrower rear body. This improves aerodynamic flow towards the diffuser, reduces drag, and increases stability in fast cornering. In a category where drag and balance are key, the engine stops being just a source of thrust and becomes a generator of collateral aerodynamic advantages. But not everything is gold under the covers of the SF26. Unprecedented innovation brings with it risks never before faced. Steel, although more resistant to temperatures, suffers more from thermal cycles. The first prototypes showed signs of cracking and warping after extensive bench sessions. In a season of 24 races, and with the limit of only 4 engines per driver, a single failure can mean penalties on the grid, lost points, or a championship ruined before reaching the final stretch. Ferrari's reliability team has been working under maximum pressure to contain these risks. The collaboration with AVL was essential to develop special alloys and optimize geometries that better dissipate heat and withstand high-frequency vibrations. But even with these advances, the margin for error is minuscule, and time is of the essence. Because while Ferrari refines its masterpiece, Mercedes and Red Bull already have their own legal and illegal weapons in motion that could change the game completely. Furthermore, there is the psychological factor. Betting on such a radical solution requires total conviction, and that does not always exist when working under media and political pressure, as at Ferrari. Every time something fails in the tests, every small setback with the alloys, or every bench test that does not produce the expected numbers, the shadow of doubt returns to fly over the project. Is there time to return to the aluminum engine? Is steel really sustainable over an entire season? Or are we building a monster that will devour itself on the run? The promises of SF26 are as great as the risks it takes. Ferrari is not just designing an engine. He is engineering a revolution in the middle of an internal battle. And in Formula One, that is never a guarantee of success. It's just the beginning of a race against the clock and against yourself. Sometimes in Formula One, the biggest enemy is not on the track, is within the team's own walls. That is exactly what Ferrari experienced at the end of 2025, when an internal leak triggered a media and technical earthquake that still resonates today in the halls of Maranello. And it wasn't just any leak. It was a direct blow to the heart of the SF26 project. An open, bleeding wound that exposed the weaknesses of the team's most ambitious plan in decades. It all started with the arrival of new engineers from Alpine, hired by Ferrari to strengthen its engine department for 2026. Experienced people with solid technical credentials who came to bring freshness to the development. But what they found when they landed on the Italian team was far from the promised scenario. According to multiple reports leaked to specialized media, some of these new technicians were disappointed with the real state of the steel engine. They didn't just question his performance. They went further. They stated that the Renault engine from their previous home was more advanced and refined at that same point in development. The impact of these statements was immediate and brutal, not just because of what they said, but because of what they implied. If someone coming from the outside with access to comparative information claimed that the heart of the SF26 was inferior even to a power unit that is not among the favorites of the paddock, what kind of technical base was Ferrari building? It didn't take long for the leak to go viral. Technical forums, specialized media, journalists with privileged access, and even former engineers began to talk about the Maranello blooper. Within the team, the damage was deep. Not only because of the loss of confidentiality, but because doubts that were previously whispered in private meetings were now international headlines. And with Ferrari, any crisis is multiplied. The internal pressure reached extreme levels. Discussions that seemed resolved were reactivated. Technical sessions were canceled. And some parts of the team began to promote the idea that it was better to abandon the steel project before it was too late. The political and technical consequences of this scandal have not yet fully emerged. What is clear is that Ferrari has crossed a point of no return. The engine is running, the cards are on the table, and the pressure no longer comes only from their rivals. It comes from within, from the depths of a structure that knows it only has one more chance to show it can win, or condemn yourself once again to watching the glory pass by from the wall. At this point, it is worth stopping and looking beyond the smoke left by this technical and political storm. Because what is happening with the SF26 is not just the story of one engine. It is the story of a legendary institution that finds itself, once again, on the edge of an abyss that it has dug itself. A story that we have seen before, told with different characters, different cars, different directors, but with a pattern that repeats itself like an unresolved curse. Ferrari is not only competing against Red Bull, Mercedes, or McLaren. He is competing against his own past, against his half-hearted decisions, against the ghosts of the seasons in which he had the car, the talent, and the opportunity, but let everything slip away due to internal errors. The SF26 represents that eternal promise of resurgence, of recovering lost dominance, of reconciling with a fan that has been waiting for years for something more than partial improvements and excuses at press conferences. Subscribe to continue uploading more of that content. Now you really think about all this.